Welcome to Authentically Debz, my podcast. A Southern girl looks at 70.
Okay, I just recorded what I thought was my last episode of this first season of my podcast, Authentically Debz, only to find out that because of technical issues, I had not. Or maybe it's my fault for being not so tech savvy. But at any rate, we're going to do this again. And this time, you're going to hear it. Kind of cut off my last episode. It was about an actor friend of mine who was reading for me for a couple of self-tapes I was doing. She's a marvelous actor and is the official reader in a fabulous acting class I take virtually right now that comes out of New York. And after we finished and she had been my reader, we just chatted a bit and to see what both of us were up to. One thing she mentioned to me was that she was working on some type of, I think, screenplay, and it was based on, or maybe it was a documentary. I'm not quite sure. She needed more information on a place that was open in the late 70s in Manhattan, and she couldn't think of the name of it, but she needed some research on it. And it was a swingers club. And I said, oh my God, I know the name of that place. It's called Plato's Retreat. And I was living in New York then, and I actually went to it once with this guy I was dating, who was a Jewish guy from Brooklyn. But I met him in California, and when I came to New York, he later joined me. Just really for a visit. Oh, by the way, he was a drug dealer. And we both grew up. And he now lives in the next beach town for me. We don't ever see each other. I know he's married. Hope he's doing well. I'm sure he is. I think by trade, he is an electrician. So anyway, so he and I told her, went to this Plato's Retreat one evening. I'm sure he was the one who wanted to go. Plato's Retreat was a late night club in Manhattan, and you could get in there if you were female, alone, or with another female. You could only get in there as a male if you were with a female. You know, this was not a current place. It was back in the day. But so he and I walked in there one night. If there was a cover charge, he paid for it. I don't even remember. But I know that when we walked in, it was a big room. Also, there was no alcohol. That's about the only rule that they adhered to. I'm sure there must have been drugs that came in with people because no one searched us, that's for sure. I didn't have any drugs. He may have, but there was no alcohol. I guess that was a city ordinance or something. But people were all gathered around this huge buffet table of wonderful looking food, and they did have beverages, but they were not alcoholic. And a special thing was that almost all of the people, particularly the women around the buffet spread, were topless and possibly bottomless. And that probably went for the men too. I don't remember looking in that direction at that point. But Richard, the person I was with, my so-called boyfriend at the time, thought it would be a good idea if we, did what the locals were doing. So I don't know what we did with our clothes, or at least I don't know what I did with the top part of mine, but I do remember standing at the buffet table, topless, and I don't frankly know what he did. So we had food and I tried to act normal because everyone else seemed to think this was completely normal behavior. And away from the buffet table were several entrances to other areas of this club. And most of those entrances were to private rooms. So you would walk down this corridor, and there would be rooms on each side. And the doors were usually closed to these rooms. And I don't know that there was a rule. I don't know how we knew to do this, but you could knock on the door, and unless someone said, "No, don't come in," then you could actually open the door and see what was happening in those rooms. No one ever told us not to come in. So, and a couple of people invited us in to join them. But I guess there was one more rule, because only 3 people could be in a room, not 4 or more. So we opened some rooms. Some people were having sex. A duo saw a menage a trois. Look it up if you don't know what it means. So we spent a little time just kind of looking around in all these different rooms. One thing was for sure, I was not in Kansas any longer. Then we went to another area of that club, really the only other area besides the big, huge buffet room and the private rooms, which were down several entrances of hallways. The other part that we hadn't seen was, I don't know that we saw a sign, but it was called the orgy room. And upon first glancing at it, to me, the first image in my head was a bunch of snakes, because people were packed into that room. They were all naked. They were intertwined in one way or another. Some were having, they were all having sex of some kind, either missionary style or doggy style or perhaps anal or cunnilingus or fellatio. And you can look up those terms too, or Google them. But I was not really in shock, but I'd never seen anything like this in my life, nor have I ever again. I did notice that a couple of times people would change partners. I don't even know if they knew who they were with any longer, because I don't know if these people were sober or were high on drugs, but they would change partners just like they were blowing their nose. I mean, it was no big deal. So I just stood there staring, as he did, for several moments. He never suggested that we join them, but I'm quite sure he would not have minded. I'm not even sure there was room for any more people to be on that huge, what I guess you would call a mattress. This was a huge space. It was packed with people, and it was definitely pre-AIDS. Wouldn't be really good in a pandemic like this either. So Richard and I were quite different. He, the Brooklyn Jewish boy, me, the Southern wasp. We argued about many things. We liked each other, but we argued about many things. And we had an argument there. And I think it was when we finally decided to get a room there. And I don't really know what we argued about, but it was obviously probably something he wanted to do that I didn't. Or maybe he wanted to let someone join us and I didn't. I don't quite remember, honestly. But I do remember walking out of Plato's retreat fully dressed between 4 and 5 a.m. in the morning in Manhattan. And I think it was a weekend. And it was the strangest feeling. It must have been summer or fall or spring, because it was not prohibitively cold. And, it's what I've always thought about New York. You never know what's going to happen. When you walk out of your abode, wherever you are, anything is possible. And that was just such a strange experience. And I wanted to share it with you for some reason. The last thing I want to share, which should end this season, Authentically Debz, and we'll go into the second season sooner or later, soon, is about a probation school that I worked at. A probation school is not an official juvenile facility. They don't have as many rules. The main rule of a probation school is if you don't go to this school, you're going to lock you back up again. And this is for juveniles. So the kids that were sentenced to a probation school generally came to that school. It's not to say they didn't misbehave. They just didn't want to misbehave badly enough so that they'd be sent back to juvie, where they would definitely be locked up, because probation schools were not locked down. What I'm going to tell you about was from a probation school in Hollywood where I worked, and I believe this was my third position working with youth at risk, and this is when I really decided I was in love with my day job. To me, it was like the ER of education. You never knew what was going to happen, and there was such a need there to help kids. Although I've primarily been a special educator at my day job for years, at this school I was a general educator because I'm certified in both general ed and special ed. And amazingly enough, they gave me an assistant. Thank God. She was wonderful. Because usually they don't give you an assistant or a para-educator if you have a general ed class. That's only for special ed usually. But they did. They had little or no security there. They did have a young female that was a security person, but almost any of the kids there, which were basically between age 15 and 18, could have overtaken her easily, and probably got through with a lot of stuff, a lot of contraband, possibly. I do remember I had my car keyed while I was there. There was no protective area for staff vehicles because of probation school that I had worked at, the first probation school I had worked at, just after working at my first go around with youth at risk, which was a continuation school where they had better security. But this was the second probation school I had worked at. The first one, which had very minimal security also, was in a city around LA called Southgate. And at that school I really learned my lesson. I had my wallet stolen, I had my phone stolen, so I learned a lot. I learned a lot of what not to do and how to function successfully in those schools. And, you know, the kids didn't really mean anything by it personally. It was just their business at that time. But anyway, so I'm at this school in Hollywood, and everything took place in this building. And this organization that I was working for, it seems like all of the settings were old churches that they had turned into a school. So the kids ate lunch. They didn't eat breakfast, but they ate lunch at the school. And they couldn't leave until the school day was over. And sometimes if they behaved themselves, we would go to the gym once or twice a week. Let me also say at this point that this was a co-ed class. I did have one pregnant minor. I had 3 or 4 girls in all, and I had about 7 or 8 boys. So we go to the gym and one day, and I'm there with my assistant and watching them play ball, because usually at the gym they play basketball, and they usually play full court basketball. So I'm just kind of looking at them but chatting with my assistant, and suddenly I get hit in the head with a basketball, and it hurt like hell. And I thought, what in the world? And a couple of the boys in the class, as they ran by, said, "You okay, miss?" And I said, "Yeah, I'm okay. I just assumed it was an accident." So I was kind of recovering from that, and then I got hit in the head again with the basketball. And I thought, in my painful condition, okay, this is sort of like the Twin Towers. Once, maybe it was an accident. Twice, this looks a lot like terrorism. So, again, as I was recovering and my assistant was kind of trying to hover over me, she said, "You know, someone's doing this." One of the boys, and of course, I don't even think the girls were playing ball. And although she was trying to protect me, I was looking around because I certainly didn't want it to happen again. I wanted to see who was doing this. Well, lo and behold, I got hit one more time by a basketball, and by the basketball they were playing with, but out of the corner of my eye, just as it left his hands, I saw who did it. So that basketball game was over. That PE session was over. We went directly back to the classroom. Security, as it was called in, and this student was sent home. I think he was sent home for a week. So that's just something that I thought about. What I want to tell you about with this class is to do with really one student, but I'm going to bring in another student who was sort of the little spokesperson for the classroom, far from the leader, and was really the runt of the litter. He was the smallest kid in the class, but also the most talkative. And he addressed me as Miss Gray, but if he happened to be talking to someone and he said something about me or something, he would refer to me as Miss Summer. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And I remember that, I noticed this for a couple of days, but it was nothing that was really disrespectful because they were not calling me Miss Summer to my face. They were not even doing it to upset me. It was just a way like, Miss Summer wants us to write this, or Miss Summer said to do it this way. And I just thought, why are they calling me Miss Summer? Okay, so Friday comes around, and I go home for the weekend. My assistant goes home, and we come back Monday morning, and there is sort of a pall on the school, and particularly my room, my classroom. There was only not more than 3 or 4 classrooms in that school building. And what had happened was that another student who I had failed to mention, but he was the origin of the Miss Summer. The little guy who I kept noticing saying that got that from this kid, who I don't know ever said it to anyone, but the little guy who was the noisy one. But he called me Miss Summer, and the kid that originated it, that first called me Miss Summer, that I didn't know until that morning, had been killed at a rave party that weekend. He was dead. This kid was soon to be 18. He was a big kid. He was likable. He was the leader of the classroom. He was definitely gang affiliated, and I imagine he was shot and killed as a result of that at the rave party. But it was truly sad, and my assistant came over to me later in the day, and she said, because she had also heard me referred to as Miss Summer, and at this point I knew nothing about it. She said, well, found out where Miss Summer came from. And I said, really? Enlighten me. And for the life of me, I cannot remember this young man's name. But she said, although the little guy is who you heard it from, the young man that was killed is the one who started calling you that. And I said, why? And she said, well, rumor has it that he thought you were hot. So he just called you Miss Summer. And I don't know what to say about that, except I started writing a screenplay about it. To me, that remains the saddest thing about working with this population. And it's one reason, frankly, I'm glad I'm retiring, because I'm tired of day jobs. I want to do what I want to do right now, which is my art. And the sad part about working with youth at risk, incarcerated youth, is that sometimes they die. Sometimes they commit suicide. Sometimes they overdose with drugs. Sometimes they're shot and killed. And sad to say, on my watch as a teacher, I have had 9 or 10 students die. And 2 of them have been girls, the rest have been boys. And they've ranged in age from to 18, and it's just so terribly sad. I intend to continue being the advocate for them. I have some kids, very few. I can count them on one hand, who I'm still in touch with. And I think that possibly has something to do with why they're not locked up. They're going on with their life. And I'm going to end it here, because I can't think of anything else I want you to know about me right now. I definitely, in the next season, want to hear from people of any stripe or creed. Definitely want to talk about mental illness, people that may have OCD and, like me, have survived it, other forms of mental illness, or if you've just experienced something like I've experienced in my life, or if you have something completely different. Hope to learn something, and I hope you can learn something from my podcast as it continues. And thank you so much for listening and being a part of Authentically Debz, which has been in my life up to this point. Take care, and I can, but George Floyd couldn't. I can't breathe. Hey everyone, thanks for listening to Authentically Debz, a Southern girl looks at 70. And if you liked my show, please subscribe, leave a review, and definitely tell a friend. Oh, and make sure and visit my website where you can keep up with my current projects, learn a little more about me, and follow my latest news. And that website is www.deborahjangray.com. The spelling is Debora, no H, Jangray. You can also find me on social media as an activist, actor, and friend. Specifically on Twitter at Deborah Jan Gray, YouTube as Deborah Gray, Instagram as Deborah Jan Gray, and Facebook, including Messenger, as Deborah Jan Gray. Same spellings. I'm not everywhere, but I'm definitely not hard to find. And most importantly, blessings to everyone